Joseph Backholm is a senior fellow for Biblical Worldview and Strategic Engagement. Now at the Family Research Council. FRC is, of course, one of our partner sponsor organizations. There you go. He spent the last few years at the Colson Center for Biblical Worldview, where he spearheaded a project that had been a vision of his for a while, called "What Would You Say?" What Would You Say is a series of incredible videos that was produced and led and directed by Joseph. That was really kind of a PragerU or a Khan Academy for Christians and conservative worldview responses to culture's toughest questions. So, whatwouldyousay.org is a wonderful website, their Facebook page, their YouTube channel as well. You guys have incredible resources there. Before that, Joseph was out in his home state, his original home state, born and raised in Washington State. So, Joseph, the students heard from Aaron Bear. Aaron Bear is the president of Citizens for Community Values. They heard from him earlier in the week. He runs Ohio's Family Policy Council. So that means that is the organization in the state of Ohio that would be considered social conservative or Christian conservative. So they advocate for life, religious liberty, parental rights, and more. Pro-family organization. Joseph ran a similar organization in Washington State called the Family Policy Institute of Washington, led such campaigns, ballot initiatives as the Just Want Privacy campaign for the first transgender bathroom movement in America out there. Because we always teased Joseph when he came here that he came from the future, right, on the left coast. And especially with social and cultural issues, was facing many statewide battles that many of us would face soon, but oftentimes was kind of the first early returns on those. So we really appreciate Joseph, and he's going to speak to you today and also tomorrow. So we're thrilled that he's spending a few days with us. Joseph Backholm, everyone.
Well, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be with you today, and we're gonna get right into it. You heard a little of the introduction and kind of my. Can you guys hear this? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I'm actually experiencing some hearing issues, so I don't know if anybody else can hear it as well at the moment. So when you do ask questions, we'll get to that. You're gonna have to speak loudly because I'm struggling up here right now. My time in Seattle is really kind of, I ran a social issue organization in Seattle, and I don't know what you guys know about Seattle, but Seattle wouldn't be first described as a socially conservative place. And that's what I am. And so I spent a lot of time working on those issues there and learning a lot, and also part of that is understanding how people, even within our sphere, think about them, and these categories of issues. And the first thing I want to do is actually talk about, why are we categorizing them in this way? The title that they asked me to give, I did this for the first time last year, why social issues matter. And I think in order to answer that question, we want to first think about, as believers, and I'm going to make sure my clicker is working, and it's not so far. Do I have to turn this on? That usually helps, right? Boom, there it is. Why issues matter at all. Why ideas matter. And I think that's kind of the foundational point. Why do social issues matter? Why do economic issues matter? Why does sports matter, or do they? Or why does what I think about anything matter? And that is, to me, the first question that we need to answer when we think about why social issues matter. And as Christians, what is the answer to that question? Do ideas matter? And underlying that is anything true? Does it matter? Is everything a matter of opinion? Is everything a matter of preference? Is the answer to this question relative? Different cultures, different times, do ideas matter, and why ideas matter? And I throw up here 2 Corinthians 10:5, taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, casting down every high thing. I don't have my Bible with me, but we take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, casting down strongholds and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. Amen. Right? So it's this idea that every idea, and that's what Paul's telling us in that letter, we take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And the reason we take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ is because there is a Christian and an unchristian way to think about absolutely everything. Absolutely. Even the things that you think of benign, entertainment, the food we eat. Now, there is a godly way to think about absolutely everything that you do. The clothes that you put on, how you spend your time, where your money goes, the words that you use, the intonation with which you use those words, right? Everything that we do can either be submitted or not submitted to the gospel. So do social issues matter? Or why social issues matter? And the answer is yes. First, because as believers, everything matters. Everything matters. Colossians 1, go read through that. All things are created for him, by him, and through him. And in him, all things hold together. The entire universe. It's true of the metaphysical universe, and it's true of the physical universe, and it's true of the intellectual universe, the theological, the philosophical universe. All things matter. So that's the starting point, right, of this conversation for me. And then why? But why do we talk? Why are we even asking the question? Because it is a legitimate question, especially in the right-of-center world, right? We have this divide between economic and social issues. Why people avoid social issues? Why is there this tendency to say, well, you can do that stuff. I prefer to deal with these other issues. And I think the simple answer to that is because social issues are harder. Social issues are simply harder because they implicate things that are deeper and I think ultimately more important. And I know that not everyone in this room is married, but you are in relationships. And there's a principle I kind of live by at this point in my life, which is the conversations I least want to have, I most need to have. That there is a correlation, there is a connection between how much I don't want to talk to that person about that thing and how important it is that I talk to that person about that thing. Because the desire not to have the conversation is an indication that it's actually very important. And I think that dynamic, if when you get married and I can see the spouses smiling at each other, and if when you get married, you will have that experience. It's like, I really don't want to deal with that, which is probably a good sign that I need to deal with it, okay? And I think that's what we're dealing with here culturally with some of these issues as well. They are simply harder, and we're getting into talking about why some of those are. But there's another thing about this, because social issues are often termed as moral issues. And there's this instinct and there's this desire to believe that, well, you can't legislate morality. When we think about social issues, it is important to define the terms, and maybe we'll get into that, because people think about those in different ways. But when we think about social issues, some of the first things that come to mind are abortion, gay marriage, and homosexuality, and can gay couples adopt children, and now racism is certainly categorized into the social issue sphere. And these all implicate morality, an idea that this is right. Abortion is wrong, right? Whatever that is. I think something is right, therefore it should be this way. I think something is wrong, so it should be this way. And because we don't all agree about what is right and wrong, there's this sense that, well, if you try to take your moral conviction about that issue and put it into law, you're legislating your morality, right? And we don't think it's right to legislate morality. And my very quick rebuttal to this is the fact that it is impossible not to legislate morality. And this is really important for everybody to understand. Amen. And I'll provide a very trite, but I think accurate example. The street that we drove in to here has a speed limit, right? And it's probably, I don't know, we're in a state park, right? So it's probably 20 miles an hour, something like that. It's low. the presence of that speed limit does not offend probably anyone in this room. Now, if we were starting from scratch, we might have a debate about whether it should be 15 or 25, right? But in principle, nobody's offended by the idea that there's a speed limit there. But that speed limit is a moral law, and I will try to explain to you why. Is because that speed limit, underlying the presence of that speed limit, is the belief that it is good. It is a moral good. It is an absolute moral good to preserve human life. And that because we are in a state park and there are children who are going to be walking and riding bikes and families are going to be running about recreating, it is important that none of us come flying through there at 75 miles an hour, right? Because that would endanger the lives of the people who are in the area recreating. Now, there are some roads you can drive 75 miles an hour on legally because there's 6-lane highways and they're in Texas, and that's where I live, and everybody drives 90, even though it's 75. But the idea of a speed limit, certain things are good, certain things are bad. The reason we don't argue about the presence of speed limits is because we generally agree that it is an unnecessary risk to allow people to drive through residential neighborhoods at 90 miles an hour. Because we agree on the moral principles. And you can do that exercise with every law on the books, whether it's some kind of tax credit, whether it's an environmental regulation, whether it is the length of time we send our kids to school and what time we start and what time we finish, to the fact that you can't dump poisons into streams. Every law is taking a moral position.
Amen.
As it should. And that's not a bad thing. And the reason I think it's important to highlight this is because we, as social conservatives, are often told not to legislate morality because the implication there is that, well, you're just trying to force your religion and make people share your religious values, which is not certainly our heart, and a lot of us retreat at that accusation because, of course, I don't want to make you a Christian because I can't make you a Christian because that's not how the gospel works, right? And so we are inclined to retreat at the accusation without recognizing that the people who are telling us to stand down and go away and stop legislating immorality are also trying to legislate their morality.
Yeah.
They're just trying to legislate different morality, right? So it's really just kind of a waste of time, the conversation. And the more important conversation that we have to get into ultimately is whose morality is correct. That's a helpful, important, and meaningful conversation because no matter who wins on the abortion issue, no matter who wins on the marriage issue, everybody is legislating morality. And that's as it should be. It's the only way it can't be. So don't get hung up on it. Just make sure that everybody's being intellectually honest about what we're doing in our debates. Because this is a really manipulative argument that is often used. Just don't let it be effective on you. So, let's talk about the social issues versus economic issues. Because this is the general divide that is created in the right-of-center world, which I'm going to assume most of the people in this room are aware of, if not actually part of. You have the economic conservatives, and then you have the social conservatives, and generally the social conservatives are kind of cool with the economic conservatives, but increasingly the economic conservatives like to distance themselves from the social conservatives because they're the ones that kind of get, they're obsessing about people's sex lives. What's going on in their bedroom, and I'm kind of above that, right? I just want to make sure that the market is free and businesses can thrive and everybody can get rich. Kind of cynical, but an obtuse way of describing those categories. But let's think about it. Economic issues, moral issues, again, we established at the front. All issues matter, right? All ideas matter. Why? If we are for a person who's more inclined to be, I'm an economic conservative, I don't understand why those social issues matter. Why do we care about economic issues? And somebody can answer this. Why do we care?
Because we want people to be free and prosperous.
We do. Why do we want people to be free and prosperous?
Because it's good to be able to be free and prosperous.
Well, amen. I agree. But why? Yeah.
I'm Tennessee. I believe, well, I just want to tell you my thoughts. When you
Yeah.
said that, when you have continuing economic growth, and might not be a reason,
Take your time.
when you have economic growth, with all of that money comes a lot of power. And if you don't have moral guidelines constructing those beliefs, or constructing what you do with that, or how you help the community, or because that's where a lot of civil institutions come from.
Yeah. So we need regulation to economic power, right? But why do we care? Why do we care about strong economies? I'm going to let him give an answer too. Yeah.
The more stable an economy, the higher standard of living the society has.
Okay, that is a true statement. Why do we care about the standard of living? Yes, sir.
Because it's moral.
Okay, it's morally. Why is it good to have? Why is a high standard of living moral?
I mean, it's good for everyone around it. It's good for me, it's good for you, it's good for...
And why is that good? Why is it good for it to be good for you and me? Right here. Yes, sir.
When Jesus quotes the passage in Isaiah, he says he came to give freedom to the captives, to give sight to the blind, and all these statements that he makes is actually freeing people from their suffering and their oppression.
Okay, we had one more over here, and I'm going to let. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Free Martin from New York. We believe that humans have dignity,
Yeah.
and they have a right to live their life as they choose and flourish as they choose.
Okay, good. Now I'm gonna drill down on where I'm going with this. But I think this is an important conversation. Why do economic issues matter? And I put a lot of clues on the slide here.
Oh, I got it.
The reason we care about we got it, all right? The reason we care about economic issues is because we care about people.
Yes.
It's because we believe, and everybody was there, was touching on this, it's because strong economies allow for strong families, which allow for strong people, which is the whole goal of this social experiment that we're running, right? We want people to flourish. And if everybody's in poverty, people don't flourish. So if we all have jobs that allow us to support our families and buy cars and occasionally go on vacation and stay warm and go to the doctor when we need to, that makes life better for everybody. So the foundation of all the economic stuff, the reason we argue about marginal tax rates and inheritance taxes, is because we believe that it's good if people are doing well. We believe that it's good for somebody in a family to be able to set out and try to accomplish their dreams, and one of which is to succeed in some kind of endeavor in the market because they can go home and take care of the people who matter most to them, right?
Amen.
And so my belief is that the reason we even care about economic issues is because we care about families and we care about people, and we think it's a social good for those things to be strong, and the economy is one way of doing that. So, how I'll say this is, social issues are foundational. Okay? Social issues are foundational. And I will make this case in a couple ways. What matters more for a person's success? A strong marriage or a strong 401k? We have a social problem and we have a financial and economic problem. What do we think? Might kind of be obvious, right? But we're going to ask the question because sometimes it's important to state the obvious. If we're debating between social issues and economic issues, people will be more or less successful. A person's success in life will have a lot more to do with their marriage than a 401k. Oh, it happens to be that people who sustain marriages also happen to do better financially. But understand what the cause and what the effect is. The 401k doesn't make your marriage better. Your marriage does, on balance, make your 401k better. Because the things that are required to keep a marriage together, discipline, sacrifice, looking out primarily for other people, are the same character traits that ultimately lead to financial prosperity. In the same way, what's a bigger social problem? Somebody who's addicted to a screen or a substance, or somebody who's bouncing all the checks that they write? That's an economic problem, and then we have a social problem. And again, when we talk about the cause and effect, recognizing that neither of these are ideal situations, what is a bigger problem? And if you fix the addiction, suddenly the bounced checks go away. If you fill the bank with cash, So the checks still bounce. Eventually, give it enough time and you're going to get back to your bounce check problem, because the problem was not the bank account. The problem was with the person. The challenge was with the person, which is why you're dealing with that. So, first point, social issues are foundational culturally. Secondly, social issues have big economic impacts. Now, you probably know some of this already, but I'm going to go through this, okay? Just to review, addressing the poverty situation. Almost $22 trillion has been spent since President Lyndon Johnson declared his war on poverty in 1964. And yet the poverty rate, which had dramatically decreased in the 2 decades prior to the war on poverty, has not budged in the 50 years since then. It's been about between 12 and 15% since it started in 1964, consistently, despite spending $22 trillion trying to eliminate poverty. Now, we've had some dramatic fluctuations in the last 12 months, as we're all aware of, right? But generally, that's where we have been. Now, nobody likes poverty. We've established that, right? How do we avoid poverty? There's 3 things that need to happen. You've probably heard this other places as well, but it's really important. It's worth knowing this. If you graduate high school, get married before you have kids, and are at least 20 years old before you have a child, if you do those 3 things, there is an 8% chance that you will ever be in poverty.
Amen.
An 8% chance. And the probability is, if you are at any point, you won't be forever. An 8% chance. However, if you fail to graduate high school, if you have a child before you get married and before you're 20, you have a 79% chance of being in poverty. And the reason I think it's important to know this is because I think the evidence suggests that poverty is not a poverty problem. Poverty is a social problem. It's a human problem. It's a culture problem. There's a lot that goes into the fact that children don't graduate from high school, have kids before they're married and before they're 20. That's not I don't want to sound like that's overly simple, that challenge. And it's a spiritual problem in many ways. And it's the breakdown of families. But if we talk about, do we want to solve poverty? Universally, everybody says yes. Do we want a culture that promotes and exalts and lifts up lifetime marriage? Well, I don't know. That seems a little like puritanical, right? And we're just going to we don't want to be all self-righteous and moralist about our positions. Well, do we want to solve poverty or not? Well, maybe not. Maybe we prefer our autonomy more than we prefer the elimination of poverty. Now, let's talk about the benefits of marriage. And I'm going to read through a whole bunch of these. Marriage reduces reliance on food stamps. Only 4% of homes with a married mother and father are on food stamps at any given time. But 21% of cohabiting and 28% of single mother homes require such public assistance. Home ownership. 78% of married people own their own home, while only 41% of cohabiting adults and 44% of singles do. Marriage prevents poverty better than cohabitation. The Census Bureau finds the poverty rate for children living with 2 unmarried cohabiting parents is more similar to that of a single mother home than to those living with their married mother and father. So if mom and dad, even if they live in the same place but they're not married, the results there are going to be more like a single-headed household than if they were married. The piece of paper actually matters. Here's an interesting little side note in all of this. Even shotgun weddings are good for keeping people out of poverty. Robert Lehrman, an economist at the Urban Institute, said that women who are married between pregnancy and birth of the first child averaged a 30% higher income to needs ratio and a 15% lower degree of financial volatility. And we won't get into the definition of those. And a quote from that: shotgun marriages cut the number of years the mother and father and children spend in poverty by half, compared with those who did not marry before the birth of their first child. That's the benefits socially of the institution of marriage, of people getting and staying married. Now, there is a converse side of that, right? there is a cost of divorce. It costs a couple $2,500 to get divorced, which is not a big deal in the big scheme of things. But the social cost, a new single-parent family with children costs the government $20,000 to $30,000. Family fragmentation costs taxpayers $1 trillion each decade.
Wow.
$1 trillion each decade because marriages don't stay together on the social safety net.
1 trillion.
There's another social issue with costs. We'll get very personal. Sexually transmitted diseases. The decisions that we make in our private life with everybody's consent, of course, because that's when it's good and harmless. 19.7 new STDs every year. Merry Christmas. 15.6 billion is the cost to the healthcare system to treat these diseases. So, I skipped through that pretty quickly. We can just meditate on that for a moment, right? That's a thought. Just let that sit there for a second, boys and girls. Yeah. So there's costs. There's costs to the family. There's costs that are very personal. There's costs that are very global to a whole society when families don't stay together, when we lose the quote-unquote social issue. Now, the third point I want to make. Social issues, and this hints at the fact that they are foundational. Social issues reveal our worldview. And the reason why social issues are harder is because it implicates things that are much more important. And to talk about this, I'm going to get into a little bit of an intro to worldview and make sure we kind of are speaking the same language when we talk about what worldview is. Now, question for you. Somebody seen this before?
Yeah.
Everybody's seen this before, apparently. Okay. Ha. Well, who wants to take a stab at who's right?
Me?
Well, I know you do, because I've already got now. I'm going to give somebody else a chance. Well, we'll come back. Anybody else? Who's right? Yes, ma'am.
They're both wrong. It looks like a padlock.
They're both wrong. It looks like a padlock. Okay? I think that's a legit answer. Anybody else? What else we got? Who's right?
Both of them.
They're both right. Who thinks they're both wrong? You think they're both wrong? Yeah, she does, because it's a padlock. Okay, so we have both right, both wrong. Anybody have any suggestion about how we might be able to resolve this dispute?
Me.
Yeah, you do. Yes, he does.
The origin of somebody who drew it.
Ah, look at the origin of somebody who drew it. Austin. From Aledo, Texas. I'm in Bedford, which is kind of forward. Yeah, we're kind of neighbors. That's why you got it right. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should keep in mind the fact that you can be right without being completely right, as a partial correctness.
Okay, I think that's fair. Yes, ma'am.
Maria Friendship in Ohio.
Yeah.
So they're determining their own version of the truth based on their perspective rather than looking into evidence.
That's fair. Yeah. Well, that's fair. And the evidence, and I'm going to come back to Austin. To Austin's response, probably the best way we would agree to resolve this, okay? Now, we're going to come back to this in a second, because that picture has a lot to do with worldview. And I'm going to define worldview in this way for our purposes. Our assumptions about the origin, meaning morality and destiny. About origin, meaning morality and destiny. And when we talk about origin, where did I come from? What are the possible answers to this question? Where did I come from? Help me out. Where did I come from?
Nowhere.
Nowhere is a possible answer. What's another possible answer?
God.
God? Any others?
Nature.
Nature. Any others?
Chance.
Yes, ma'am. Texas. Also an acceptable answer. Everybody from Texas thinks Texas is where everything came from. I've only been there for 2 years, and so it's not quite that deep yet for me. Well, it's where I came from. No, it's where I came from. Okay, that was her. And yes, okay, I was assuming you were from Texas because Texans actually answer questions like this that way. Like, where did everything come from? Well, Texas, of course. Is there any other place? No, you're right. I did come from Texas. I now understand, but I am being a bit bigger picture in this question. Where did we come from? Maybe I'll say it that way. So we have nowhere or God, right? That's the possible answers to this question that shape our worldview. Meaning, does my life matter and why? What are the answers to this? What are the potential answers to this question? Does my life matter?
Some people say no. Everyone's going to die.
Okay.
Pointless.
Life has no meaning. That is an answer. Yes.
Yes, because God created you with intrinsic matter.
That is the Christian answer to this question, right? Yes. Your life matters because you were created in the image of God. I know you want out. Go ahead. Go for it.
I say yes because all lives matter.
Okay, because all lives matter. But what is the...
But why?
What are some of the other... and that is the question. Why? What are the... Not even your opinion, but what are the answers in the world to this question?
People say like your life matters as much as you kind of like help other people or find like a transcendent value.
Sure.
That you create, really.
Another way of saying that is you give your life meaning by the things that matter to you. You determine what's meaningful to you, and if you think your life has meaning, then it has meaning. If you think your life doesn't have meaning, then it doesn't have meaning. Okay? Those are some of the... Yeah, Maria?
Sorry. By the level of your accomplishments and what you contribute.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this implicates the life issue. Life has meaning only to the extent that it can contribute to society. And that if you lack certain cognitive abilities, if there are certain things you're not capable of doing physically, then your life is less valuable, less worthy of protection, whether it's at the very beginning or at the very end. It ceases to be human in the way that we think it should be human, because humans can do X, Y, and Z. If you can't do X, Y, and Z, then you're not really human. Your life doesn't really have the meaning, the value that other people's lives, so we're just going to kind of on either end do away with it. Morality. How do I know what is right and wrong? What are the answers to this question?
It depends.
Well, it depends is an answer, right? That is an answer. Well, and that is the question. Where do we get it? We're talking worldview assumptions. How do people in the world answer this question? Kyle?
Whatever the laws say.
The law determines what is right and wrong.
Either what God says or what man says.
God says determines what right is wrong. Okay? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Whether or not you're harming someone.
Okay? That is a very common answer to this question. As long as your freedom begins where my skin, your freedom ends where my skin begins. That kind of thing. Yes, sir.
How I feel about the situation in question.
How I feel about it? Yeah. Yes, sir.
What society says.
Yeah. Public opinion poll. It changes over time. What used to be awesome is now terrible. What used to be terrible is now awesome. Right? Okay. Yes, ma'am? One more. I decide for myself. And basically all of these alternative answers are just the different ways we decide for ourselves. Right? I decide based on poll. I decide based on what I had for breakfast. I decide based on what I think is going to create the best outcome for me, whatever that is. Destiny. What happens when I die? It's the final set of assumptions that we have. Yes, sir?
Nothing.
Nothing happens. I fade to black, as the song says.
We
reincarnate. I come back as a raccoon. If I haven't been good. If I have been good, I come back as Bernie Sanders. Right? Because that's the goal. Anything else? What are the other possible answers to this question? Yes, sir.
Some people would just really go into ghosts. You're just I don't know.
Yeah, you become a ghost. You pass to the other side, and then you just kind of supervise everybody else. Right? Yeah. There's one that's kind of missing.
If I'm good enough, I go to heaven.
Okay, if I'm good enough, I go to heaven. So far, I haven't even heard the biblical answer to this question. Did anybody know that?
If I accept Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior, go to heaven.
I knew I could count on the Texan for that. Because in Texas, everybody knows the Bible answers. I have figured that out. So, these set of assumptions. And again, everybody has a worldview, whether you are conscious of your worldview or not. Whether you've thought down and categorized it and said, this is what I believe about origin, this is what I think about what gives our life meaning, this is what I think about who determines right and wrong, and this is what I think about what happens when I die. Even if you haven't consciously answered those questions for yourselves, you are living your life, and everyone around you is living your life as if certain things are true. Now, the default position in our culture is that origin is, my life is an accident, even if there is a God, he doesn't really care, but there may not actually be a God. And meaning, I get meaning from my life however I derive it for myself. There's no transcendent meaning, there's no one to be accountable to. Therefore, morality is based on whatever I want it to be based on. Basic, which generally means whatever makes me happy. It determines what is right and wrong. And when I die, we don't really know. We can't prove it, so it doesn't really matter. Just do what makes you happy. That's kind of the default secular worldview that people approach life with. And that set of assumptions informs a whole lot of things. The Christian answer to this question, and if we answer those 4 questions from a biblical perspective, you have this narrative of creation, fall, redemption, and restoration, where God created everything, man broke it by sin. Jesus came to redeem the world by dealing with the sin problem and is going to restore all things in the future. That's the Christian arc of history. Now, that's a biblical worldview. What's a woke worldview? And I just kind of described this a second ago. We all kind of evolved. The problem in the world is not sin, it's injustice, however we define that. The solution is not redemption, it's a revolution, which Antifa carries out every night in Portland. And the goal is not restoration in another world where everything will be made perfect and right. It's utopian now. And the reason why they have to be so urgent and so angry and so frustrated about the things in life that are imperfect, because there's no hope for something else that ever might be better. This is the only chance they got. What's the Mile High guy? It's the one chance. I know. I'm a bad rapper, but what's the guy? You guys know the song.
Eminem.
Eminem, thank you. Thank you, it's Eminem.
I want that slide.
I should play that. I should play that. I should have that.
My wife from Cedarville, Ohio, knew that answer.
Oh, she did. Did she have do you have a demo for us?
No.
That's for karaoke tonight. Jessica will be doing Eminem. So, those assumptions, now, and we already had a hint of this. So how do we answer the question? If we take this assumption about origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, how do we answer this question? What's the assumption that helps us find out the truth about this particular problem? I'm sorry?
They have different worldviews?
Yeah. Well, they do have, yes. But what assumption? What information? Yes, ma'am.
Which way is north?
Okay.
What perspective are you supposed to?
What's the orientation? Yes. And who would know the answer to that question? The person who wrote, right? Which is why your assumptions about origin are everything. Your assumption about how that thing got there is the source of the debate. If we can prove that no human has ever been to this spot, and so it wasn't created purposely by anybody, we have no idea. It could be a lock, right? Or 6 or a 9. It's just random. But if we know somebody put it there, the way you answer the question is ask them, what was in your mind when you made it? Is it a 6 or a 9? And until you get that information, you have no way of knowing the answer to the question. So, this is true. And we're going to go back to remembering where we are in the presentation. Social issues reveal our worldview. Now let's think about how these set of assumptions inform the things that we argue about. What do you think of when you see this slogan? Anybody? What do you think of?
Abortion.
Abortion?
Wearing masks.
Okay, wearing masks. Well, yeah, there is a little bit of that now, right? My body, my choice. This is a slogan that, until very recently, we generally associated with abortion. I have the right to an abortion because of my body, my choice. Let's make the connection to what we just talked about, the assumptions with worldview. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. What is the assumption underlying this claim?
Secular worldview.
Be specific. In which specific assumption is at the root of this? Right behind you.
Your body is yours and that you are not created.
Origin. I belong to myself. My body, my choice. I belong to myself. It is totally logical. Now, this issue, what do we think? What are we talking about here?
Gay marriage.
Okay, gay marriage, right? I propose to you that the argument is not fundamentally any different. My body, my choice. What are we talking about here?
Transsexual.
Right? It's the gender revolution. The argument is not fundamentally any different. My body, my choice. You don't even have to answer the question because I put the words on the screen. Physician-assisted suicide, a different political, social issue. What's the worldview claim underlying their position? My body, my choice. My body exists to please me. It no longer does that because I'm in pain or I'm just tired. I should have the right to end my life. My body, my choice. Sex work is work. Kamala Harris, as a candidate for president, had taken this position. Decriminalize prostitution. Why? My body, my choice. Now, I hope this reframes all of the political debates that you have with people in your schools and with your friends and with your family. Because ultimately, while we talk about these as political issues, they are not fundamentally political issues. These are clashes of worldview where one side, my side, would say, we don't belong to ourselves. Our feelings are not the key to happiness. God has revealed to us how we get to human flourishing. If we obey that, if we honor Him, then we will experience human flourishing. If we don't, we will deal with pain. And then there's another side that says that's crazy. There's no God, or maybe there is, but He hasn't given us any information to know that, so we can basically ignore Him. Therefore, I belong to myself. I determine what is right and wrong. The only purpose for my existence is happiness. Therefore, whatever I feel like is going to make me happy is morally correct. Both sides are acting rationally based on the assumptions they view the entire world through. Which is why the whole accusation that, oh, you're stupid or you haven't read the right article, has nothing to do with anybody's intelligence or anybody's intentions. It has to do with the assumptions that they think, that they consciously or unconsciously carry throughout their life that allow them to process the information. If it is true that God does not exist and our existence is random, everything they believe about gender, marriage, abortion is rational. It's totally rational if we do belong to ourselves, because who are we or anybody else to say no? So, if the Bible is not true, all of these things should lead to the happiest people on earth, because they are fulfilling their every desire, doing exactly as their heart tells them to do. Every time we watch a video and Disney tells my kids that you're supposed to follow your heart, we pause it and they say, kids, where do you go when you follow your heart? And what's the answer to that? Hell. No. Yes, they know the answer to that, right? So we in my family do not learn to follow our heart because, as Jeremiah tells us, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And our heart is the path to pain. Jesus is the path to human flourishing. So we don't follow our heart. But we are dealing, there's enough evidence in the world that if following your heart were actually the key to happiness, we should see a lot of happy people running around, right? Thumbing their nose at God and doing whatever they want to do. They should be the most joyful people in the world. And of course, it's not exactly what we find. Which you will, and I think it's important to dwell on this. If the Bible is true, all of this will lead to pain. All of this will lead to pain, and I think that's actually what we are finding. And it's not coincidental. And I would say one of the many paradoxes of Christianity is that the more you try to be happy, the less happy you will be. And I challenge you to find an exception to that in your life. Think about all the people you know. And of them, the people who are working hardest to be happy are the most miserable. And on the converse, the people that you know who spend the least time thinking about themselves, who spend the greatest amount of time thinking about how they can bless other people, how they can lay down their lives for other people, will be the most joyful people that you know. No exceptions to that. And that's because God did not make us to live for ourselves. And so when we honor his intention for our lives, that's how we experience the things that we rightly desire. He put in us the desire for joy and peace and fulfillment. Those are God-given desires. It's how we get there that is the struggle. That says, that's the war between, in Galatians 5, the deeds of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. The deeds of the flesh will take you someplace very different than the fruit of the Spirit. And that's the difference between following myself and following other people. And so, the last point I'm going to make here, what happens inside of us. And all of this has kind of been leading up to this. The reason social issues matter is because what happens inside of us is much more important than what happens around us. C.S. Lewis, and the reason I have this picture of the ships up here, you're probably familiar with this example, but it's worth repeating, even if you've heard it again. In Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis writes about the ships at sea. And he says, with respect to this armada, the voyage will be a success only, in the first place, if the ships do not collide and get in one another's way. And secondly, if each ship is seaworthy and has her engines in good order. As a matter of fact, you cannot have either of these two things without the other. If the ships keep on having collisions, they will not remain seaworthy very long. On the other hand, if their steering gears are out of order, they will not be able to avoid collisions. And the analogy that he's making is that we are an armada. And the reason why the things that you do in your personal life affect other people is because we are sailing along in this journey of life. And we want to be in coordination with each other. But what happens inside of us determines the steering mechanism of our particular vessel. And once the steering mechanism gets broken, once we lose self-control, once we lose the ability to self-correct, much less the belief that it's ever important to self-correct, which is where we're at right now, is you will hear people argue vociferously that you can't be wrong if it's going to make you happy. So self-control it's not even an ambition, because there's what I need self-control for. Because I desire it, it is morally good. And we are watching on a nightly basis the fallout of a culture that has absorbed these ideas. What happens in the biggest battles you will ever fight, and it's one of the worldview differences between the right and the left, and the reason why the woke worldview, through revolution, is trying to create utopia, is because their assumptions about the heart of humanity are incorrect in reality. It's logical based on their assumptions, incorrect in reality. So they believe the reasons people aren't happy and the reasons people aren't flourishing is because systemic problems around us are keeping people poor, are keeping people unhappy. And as soon as you fix all that infrastructure, then suddenly each one of us will be happy. When the gospel tells us that the biggest battle you, I, or any of us will ever face is not the one going on around us. It's not with my sibling. It's not with my parents. It's not with my school. It's not with my country. It's with myself. And when every person gets their heart right, collectively, the armada begins to sync up. It begins to work pretty well. But if you destroy the individual steering mechanisms of every vessel, it doesn't matter how good your laws are. It doesn't matter how good your economic policy is. Everything's going to fall apart. And that's what we're seeing right now. But we are correspondingly the problem and the solution as the church, is as we have neglected the maintenance of individual steering mechanisms of our children and our friends. We also have the opportunity, and the gospel is absolutely the remedy to that problem.
Amen.
So, quick review. Why do social issues matter? They're foundational for society. They have big economic impacts. They reveal what our worldview is, and because what happens inside of us matters more than what happens around us. So, I'm done, but I think we can have a conversation here. If you have any questions, feedback, you want to argue with me, all of that is totally acceptable. I think we have about 15 minutes.
Yeah, we have a question from Maria.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So a growing social issue in young adults is a lack of desire for marriage and growing traditional families. What would you say to people who are hesitant to date?
Hesitant to date?
To even get started on that track.
Well, it depends on who they're hesitant to date. In some cases, I'd say that's wisdom. But in general, my advice on, I think marriage, the way I would encourage people to shift their view of marriage is not a capstone event in your life. And I think that's how it's thought of right now. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get a great career. I'm going to get launched on my career. Then I'm going to buy my house. And then I'm going to be ready to get married. And I'll kind of take my wife and then I've got it all now, right? And I don't think that is how, I don't think that's a gospel view of marriage. I think marriage is actually a cornerstone of our lives. And that I would encourage you. And I got married when I was 22. My wife was 20. And I'd have done it earlier if I had to do it over again, probably. And again, everybody's situation is unique. Not everybody finds their spouse early in life. But in terms of how we think about it, I would encourage people to view it as, if God brings that person to you in His time, do not ever think, there's never a good time to get married, and there's never a bad time to get married. That's unless the qualifier for that, I'm a parent of 2 teenage girls, so we have this conversation all the time. Mom and dad get vetoed, right? So it's really important. It's really important that you have people that have your best interest in mind, and I mean that very sincerely. Give veto authority to people that you trust, so that you don't because you know what happens when you follow your heart, right? And truly, the 2 best ways I know to destroy your life and everybody else's: substance abuse and bad relationships. And I'm not sure which is more damaging. A bad relationship can be just as damaging as a heroin addiction to a family. And so don't take it lightly. Give people veto authority, assuming that the people you trust, who have your best interest in mind, who love Jesus, are like, hey, this is a good thing. Whenever. I don't know that I believe there is too early. I have cousins who got married at 18, and they're doing awesome because they were ready, they were mature, they were grown up, they valued the right things. So the summary of that is I think I encourage you to view marriage as a cornerstone of your life, not the capstone. Yes, ma'am.
Next question is from Ruth Marino.
Well, we had a comment from the back that I kind of want to take. Sorry, Karen.
I just wonder what is the basis of the hesitancy in the first place?
Oh, well, that's a really long conversation, probably. and I think it's just generally frowned upon. It's commitment. It's kind of it runs it runs counter to our value of autonomy. I want to be free. I want to be able to do whatever I want. Maybe it will make me happy. My parents got divorced, which is I think that scarred a lot of people. They're afraid, and I think that's not unreasonable. But yeah, that's a really long conversation.
Next question is from Ruth Marino.
Ruth. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ruth. I'm from Hillsville, Michigan. So why do you think that in the last few decades the standard of living has gone up while respect for religion or morality have gone down, at least in the West? Because the way I see it, it kind of looks like economic prosperity has ruined us. I don't really need that, but,
Boy, howdy, it has. Does anybody have the Bible? Break out Deuteronomy chapter 8 and read in the beginning of Moses' long sermon about the warning that he gave to the nation of Israel once you've gone into the promised land and all of the things that God has given you because He's good to us, the risks of what that does to us is really, the risk is always there in civilizationally. You can see this cycle happen over and over and over again. People get fat and happy, and then when they're content then they just get weak and comfortable, and when they get weak and comfortable, they become bad people, and then the civilization just collapses, and then it gets rebuilt by strong people again, who then create success, who then, lead to prosperity. That cycle has happened many times, and so it's in human history. It's hard to think, honestly, that we can. Humans are just creatures of habit because our nature is what it is. I think the reason we've been successful in the last 20, 30 years, we're still riding the wake of an amazing, transformation that really the Western world and the gospel brought to humanity because we were obedient to God's design in many ways. And not in all ways, of course, and we never will be. But I think we've still been riding that wake. I think we're at a point where, is the standard of living for the next generation going to be as good as the current one? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's an open question for the first time in a long time.
Next question is from Austin Avery.
Deep in the heart of Texas.
When competing worldviews collide, why is it that Christianity's misdeeds and evils are highlighted, yet all other religions and worldviews are presented in a pristine condition?
Bigotry. It just is. People are not, we are all, very few people are intellectually honest, and it feels like to me that number is declining. I don't know how many people are actually always just trying to find what's true and measure everybody and everything by the same standard. Right? That's a difficult place for most people to get because we're emotionally attached to things. And we cheer for our ideas and our political allegiance just like we cheer for our sports teams. That's my guy, that's my idea, and it can't be wrong even when it's clearly wrong. And so, and Christianity just obviously has many enemies because it stands in opposition to the value of autonomy that we have placed, that our culture values very highly. And so Christianity is anathema for a lot of people, and so they want to criticize it. They want to delegitimize it. And certainly there are criticisms of Christian people that are legitimate, and who have called themselves Christians, and we have to own that, and we have to constantly strive for improvement and pray that we are not part of the problem, that we do not bring shame to the gospel in the way we conduct ourselves. But ultimately, are they sincere in their attempts to say that can't be true because that person is a bad person? That disqualifies every idea. And so they're not really interested in trying to find out what's true. They just hate those people. And so if I can lob a bomb at you, then I will. Am I going to apply the same standard to myself and my friends? Of course not, but that's not the point.
There's not a name listed, but the question is, since marriage is a foundation of our culture, do you think that everyone has a future spouse?
I think Scripture is clear that not everyone has a future spouse. No. I think, Paul has couple good long conversations about this in 1 Corinthians. And for those who are called to singleness, and I think some of us are, I think that is God-honoring and God-glorifying, and nobody should shame that. And if you feel like that's where you are, either by choice or by, God's providence, because some people, I know many people who desire to be married, and it just hasn't happened for them yet, and I'm sympathetic to that. But I think the answer is no. Not everybody, you're not missing God's will if you don't get married.
Cool. Brandon Batchelor?
Yeah, I'm Brandon Batchelor from Omaha, Nebraska. My question was, despite what you may think about, or despite your opinions on Christian doctrine in regards to same-sex marriage, do you believe that it's the government's role to determine who somebody can and cannot marry? And if so, how do you reconcile that with conservative principles?
I do. I think that the way I'll describe that is marriage is not something the government created. Marriage is something that the government recognized. So if the United States government, if Antifa wins tomorrow and the United States government is no more, there will still be people around. There will still be people forming those relationships. Children will still be the result of those things. And there will still be a whole bundle of challenges and opportunities and realities that come from the fact that men and women get together, spend their lives together, procreate, and have kids. So when the government comes in and writes something called, this is our marriage law, they weren't saying, okay, these are the relationships we like and these are the relationships we don't like. They were adjusting to a social reality. And so they are creating, the alternative to having no marriage law is, well, okay, you guys want to spend your lives together, great. If any kids result, you have to come into the court and we're going to prove maternity and we're going to prove maternity. And then, for every single kid that you have, and then if anybody, for inheritance purposes, you're going to have to write up that we're not going to make any assumptions about what parents have rights, and we're not going to make any assumptions about where your money goes when you die. You just make it so complicated to live because everybody has to go to their lawyer to do everything that the marriage law currently says. When you sign a marriage certificate, here's the bundle of rights and responsibilities that come with that relationship. So the legal institution of marriage is an efficiency that the government created in order to make people's lives less complicated. So, but then the underlying question is it appropriate to limit that in some ways? And my answer to that is yes, because not every relationship is the same. In the same way that the original marriage laws were not created because we hate people who aren't married or we hate people who are same-sex attracted. It's because this particular relationship is unique. It's unique in the sense that it creates children, and it's also true that it's uniquely valuable. You and I have relationships with all sorts of people that have varying levels of meaningfulness to us. Your best friend, my neighbor, my coworkers, my cousins. There are different terms that apply to different relationships. And it doesn't mean that the individuals in those relationships are any less valuable, any less loved by God, and any less deserving of legal protection. It just means that particular relationship is not as meaningful socially and culturally as a relationship between a man and a woman that produces children, because children have a right to their mother and father. Wow. And that's why those relationships are different. And so it never was, and never should be seen as a judgment that this relationship is recognized and encouraged and incentivized in ways that other relationships aren't. I have, and I guess that's kind of my answer to that question. Did I answer your question? Yeah. And so, yes, I think it is appropriate to incentivize things that are actually better that are actually more valuable. And those relationships are unquestionably more valuable. And it doesn't need to be a judgment. Yes?
Elizabeth Rosner?
Elizabeth.
You pick.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Roser. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I wanted to ask, so we're talking about happiness and what leads to prosperity. And there was a study done where they asked people to do things for themselves. It was international, that would lead to more happiness. And for some countries, they went out and were giving, and it translated to gratitude for them. Why is America's ideal of happiness so self-focused?
Because we're sinners. That's the most basic answer. It's not just America. You find that I don't know the study, and I know that there are some, happy clans of even my relatives in Finland and Sweden, and they seem like happy people, and they're doing their kind of Northern European village thing, and it kind of looks fun. But there are sinners everywhere, and we're not that unique in this. I think, and again, I'm not immersed in other cultures, so I don't know them as well. But my belief is that if you dig under the surface, you're not going to find that our challenges are really that unique. These are human problems. They're not just American problems. Is it maybe more intense? I think it's maybe worse here because we have so much influence in the rest of the world. Is people look to us for as an example of how you should be. So I think it's maybe more toxic that we've created this culture where I'm the only thing that matters. But we've built a worldview that has taught us that. So my belief is it's actually not just us. But it's intense because we have embraced, we have rejected God, and somebody's going to fill that role. And when you get rid of God, who fills that role? It's either government or me. of us. It's me.
Next question from Mark.
Hello, I'm Mark. I'm from Sacramento, California, and it should be noted that I'm a student at UC Berkeley, and
Awesome.
a lot of the interactions I have with students can see that having children before marriage or before graduating promotes poverty, but instead they use that to confirm their worldview and then argue to promote abortion and
Well, yeah, I've certainly heard that argument. Yes. And are you asking what my response is to that?
Yeah, how to convince to reject the worldview and not use that information as a not use the confirmation bias to allow the evidence to support that.
Yeah, on that specific argument, why should you not abort your children in order to save yourself from poverty, essentially? Well, because on the what's the greater good? I mean, let's walk that logic to its natural conclusion. I mean, we could just have a giant culling of people, kill all the poor people, then you don't have any poor people, right? It is just it's an imbalanced evaluation of what's good. Is that it's the principle that we should, a hill that I'm certainly willing to die on, that I think most decent people, if they think through it long enough, is we don't kill people as a way of solving their poverty problems. And that includes parents don't kill their kids because, it's hard to take care of. I mean, and that this is a much more present problem in other developing parts of the world where they do. I mean, you go to India and they have their 4th or 5th or 6th kid, and it's like, I can't take care of you anymore, and they are giving their children away. And people are morally, like, they reject that. I mean, they see that as, a problem where we just get rid of our kids. But that, to me, is the principle, is that's not a solution to poverty. Murder is not a solution to really any problem.
This will be probably the final question from Josh. Josh Levati.
Hi, Josh Levati from Ashland, Ohio. Do you think the church could be doing a better job spreading the gospel to the LGBTQ community? And if yes, how?
The church can do a better job of spreading the gospel to everybody. Yes. It's a good question to end on this one on. In some ways, how you deliver the gospel to somebody is very individualized. So, who am I talking to? What's my relationship with you? How do I know you? And I think evangelism, and I think one of the mistakes the church has made is we have corporatized evangelism, and we have segmentized evangelism to the point where my job as a Christian is to bring my friends to the church house on Sunday morning so then they can be evangelized to. I don't think that's the New Testament model that we see in Acts. Is let's go invite people, then bring them into our house, and then the guy who really knows the gospel will tell them about Jesus. I think the outsourcing of evangelism is a problem, and I think we need to, again, take responsibility upon ourselves. This is what I do. The Great Commission is for all of us. It's not for my pastor. And, by the way, I'm going to just drive this point. The Great Commission is not to go into all the world and make believers. It's to go into all the world and make disciples.
Wow.
I don't care if you're a believer. Even the demons believe and tremble. I want to know, are you a disciple or not? That's the standard. That's the standard. And so, personally, we need to take that responsibility back upon ourselves. But I think one of the issues that you touch on in the question is they don't receive it well. They think I hate them, and they think I'm mean because I'm a Christian. How can I convince them that I love them? And it's a legit question, and my response to you would be, we as believers need to have biblical expectations about what life on earth is going to be. And who is our great example? Jesus. What did they do to Jesus? Anybody remember?
They killed him.
Okay. So, should it be our expectation that our life of discipleship will be resistance-free? It should not. Of the 12 disciples, the original 12, you know how many of them were martyred? 11. Right? So this is a very high martyrdom rate at the early church. Now, are we going to be martyred? I don't know. Should we be open to it? Absolutely. But what we shouldn't do is have the expectation that because I love Jesus and because I care about everybody around me, they're going to understand that and they're going to treat me well. Jesus is the most misunderstood person who ever walked on earth.
Mercy.
You are going to be misunderstood. Now, have enough humility and self-reflection to make sure that your attitude and the way you speak truth is actually in love and not in condemnation and the desire to win a debate. But just because somebody doesn't receive it well does not mean you've done something wrong. Go back and read the book of Acts tonight. You can, and let Peter and Paul inspire you. Because I don't know what the percentage of, but it wasn't high of the people who actually responded well. Every town they went into, some of them, nobody responded well, and then a handful of people did, and then the rest of them stoned them until they ran out of the town to the next place. That was their experience. So I just think we as believers need to adjust our expectations a little bit and remember that doing it right doesn't mean everybody's going to love us, and that's okay. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, say all manner of evil against you falsely for my name. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so they did the false prophets who came before you. Anybody who has no enemies, as Winston Churchill would say, you have some enemies, good, that means you stood for something at one point in your life. So, to me, that's an expectations thing. Love everybody, surrender to Jesus. If they don't like it, don't worry about it. Because there is soil there that is ready to receive those seeds. And God will lead you to it if you're not deterred by somebody who doesn't understand.
Amen.
All right. Amen. Thanks. I'm done.